It's not often that we run into a statistic that's the worst in 37 years, the worst since Richard Nixon was still president. U.S. newspapers' print ad sales fell 14% to less than $8.5 billion in the first quarter of this year. That would be the lowest level, yes, in 37 years, which would be 1971. Leading the way down, fewer real estate and help wanted ads. So maybe it's economy driven, but it is a perhaps bigger problem than that. Slow news day. We know how that feels. Washington Post, New York Times, Gannett, and McClatchy are the biggest newspaper companies in this country. All right, well, that fits into the broader conversation about people reading and people's education in this country. You've heard the argument that America's schools have lost their edge. They're not graduating enough engineers. China and India turn out hundreds of thousands more engineers than we do, and that means our future is at risk. All right, what if it's not quite true? This is one of those conventional wisdoms that there are some people who strenuously disagree with it. So let's talk with Bob Compton, executive producer of the documentary 2 Million Minutes. Many of you on our show would have seen him a couple weeks ago as we've been talking about this education issue. Jay Matthews is the education reporter for the Washington Post and author of the upcoming book, Teach, Baby, Teach. Thanks to both of you for being with us. And Bob, let me start with you. You spent a lot. You did a movie following kids around here in the U.S., high schoolers, America, India, and China.
That's correct.
Bottom line takeaway: what is it that makes you believe that they are doing something more right than we are?
Well, a couple things. One, I went into the classrooms and saw how they were teaching. I talked with students. I've looked at their curriculum in detail and compared it to the American curriculum, or at least one state's American curriculum. Did the same with China. And I hire young people in both those countries in technical jobs. I own 6 software companies here in the U.S. I hire people in those technical jobs. I am getting the best talent for high-wage, high-technology jobs in India and China.
And how do you respond, before I bring Jay into the big, when CEOs say that, our viewers all say, well, maybe that's just because he wants to pay them less and they will work for less money over there when they're really qualified here. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'll tell you how I respond to it. My 6 software companies here have 200 open positions right now for Java programmers, paying $100,000 to $120,000 a year. If somebody wants a job, send me their resume, I'll hire them. I cannot find the employees.
In this country?
In this country. So
right,
I am
Jay.
forced to go overseas.
Jay, what do you say?
Well, there is indeed a teeny slice of Chinese and Indian schools that are educating kids at a very high level, and that's good. The more middle-class Chinese and Indian we have out there, the more customers for American goods. But Bob is suggesting that our country is going to hell in a handbasket if we don't improve the schools, because the schools are the key to the economy. We've proved over the last several years that it's not our schools that produce our great economy. It's people like Bob. Bob will tell you himself he had a pretty bad education. He didn't do very well, didn't apply himself, but he's a smart, creative guy. Once he got into the American economic, social, and cultural system, he went bananas. He's a terrifically creative guy who's produced lots of companies, produced lots of millionaires. It's not the schools that produce Bob. It's our system, which the Chinese and the Indians have a long way to go to.
But you're talking about leaders there, Jay, right? I mean, people who will be creative and entrepreneurs and lead companies. Most people are going to work at companies, and most people need jobs. And that's where the problem appears to be, in the magic middle.
In order to get jobs, effective jobs, you have to be creative. The Chinese and Indian systems, the Chinese political system, the Indian social system, discourage creativity of the sort
that
has made Bob all this money.
Jay, Chinese and Indians are highly creative. I employ
they are indeed, but if you are a creative person in China, the political system isn't going to let you go to the full extent of that creativity.
And the
social system in India is not going to
answer one question for me, Jay.
Yeah.
When were you in India?
Never been in India.
You've never been to India. When was the last time you were in China?
1989.
1989, almost 20 years ago. Things have changed radically, Jay. You need to get out more.
I'm afraid, Bob, that you're
there.
Absolutely wrong about that. The political system in China...
How can you say... You haven't been there, man. How can you say that?
Have you visited any reform for labor camps in China? Have you looked at what happens to
Jay, I'm looking
disciplines?
at education. I'm looking at education, and their education is superior. And it's not just a tiny slice. We have 53 million kids in K through 12 here in America. In India, they have 212 million. In China, they have 194 million. So a tiny slice of 200 million, we're talking about tens of millions of kids who are getting great education. It is happening, Jay. You've got to go see it.
But 2/3 of the kids in each of those countries aren't getting much of an education at all because they have huge numbers of poor people who aren't getting out of school at all.
Jay, so what? Some of them aren't getting an education. There are a lot of people in America who aren't getting an education. I mean, I see it in Memphis where I live. The fact is, hundreds of millions of Indians and Chinese are getting a great education, and they're raising their cognitive skills.
Hundreds of millions?
Over periods of years, Jay.
Completely false.
Over periods of years, Jay.
It's a complete sham. Hundreds of millions.
Well, no, hold on. Let me just clarify here. Because
The statistics I gave you.
Right. I don't want to argue over that. So you said right now there are 53 million students in K through 12 in the United States.
Do you agree with that, Jay? Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And in India, that comparable number is 200 million.
212 million. Is that right, Jay?
I think that's probably right. But
That's
the
from
problem
the
is
Columbia School of
the vast
Education.
majority of those 212 million don't get out of senior high school.
Right, but
only
isn't that
a
true,
tiny
Jay,
slice
that
of
most
Indians
Americans
get-
don't either? Most people
exactly
finish
right.
with a high school equivalent degree, and that's what they have their career based on.
83% of Americans get out of high school, and 30% have college degrees. The percentage of kids getting college degrees in India and China is much less.
But Jay, the numbers game here, I think, is what would worry a lot of people, right?
Well,
because even if you only have a small percent of the 212 million actually going on to jobs, that's still more than maybe we would have, right?
It's a false calculus, because you have to consider in that calculus how many of your people in your country are still living subsistent wages in farms, and which is a huge drag on both those economies.
Jay, let's talk about economically. I am telling you, because I don't know how many people you employ in India or China, or in the U.S. for that matter, but I have started lots of companies all over the world. I've invested in companies all over the world. I'm hiring people right now into high technology, software, and biotechnology companies in India and China, as well as the U.S., and I'm getting the best talent, the most creative talent, the highest educated talent in India and China. Now, you tell me your experience.
Well, what you're saying is absolutely right, and keep in mind that they're being hired by an American company that has all the creative talent and all the freedoms to do what you want to do with those companies. The reason you're so successful is because you have the creativity that matches the creativity of your culture. The Chinese, unless they find you, are going to find much less ability and range to be able to put out that creativity because of the limits of their political system.
Right.
Same thing with India, the limits of the economy and the social system.
You got to get over to India and China, man. You don't know what you're talking about.
That's what your movie is about, India and China.
Yes, and you've got to go visit there. It's changed since you've been there, man. Go to India. It's changed. Aaron's been there.
I have had long conversations with our correspondents in both places.
I tell you what,
and
I'll
what
pay
you're
for your plane
describing
ticket,
is a
Jay.
thin slice of
Jay,
the country
I
that's very
think, hey,
I'll pay your plane ticket.
Jay,
Go
I
with
got
me.
an idea.
I'm
What
going
if
in
you
December.
two go together?
Go in December with me.
And
I'm
you
taking a
come
whole
on
team.
together from
we're
there.
We're going to tour schools through December and January. I'll pay your way. Come with me.
What do you say, Jay?
Unfortunately, the Washington Post can't accept freebie trips, but our correspondents are already there, looking at it every day, and they are telling me exactly what's happening. You're describing countries that don't exist.
Okay, look, we got to leave it there, guys. Here's the takeaway, though. You both have fair points, though. I have to say, Jay, that Bob's one point that he does raise, you got to go. You got to go, right? You got to go. I know you got great reporters and everything, but go over and visit.
Because we have Bob, we're going to win this battle in the long term. They don't have Bob there.
All right, Bob, Jay, thank you very much. And I am sure a lot of you had some very strong opinions about that conversation, but that's really what all of you were asking for. You were asking for someone who hired people to tell us where people were better educated, here or there. And you also asked us about whether it was a money issue or an education issue. Bob tried to answer those questions for you.